Good morning. Thank you, Tushar, for joining us, and thank you for accepting our invitation to speak with us. Um, it is not often that we find to get an opportunity to speak with somebody like you, who, amongst other things, just got back from China. So there's a lot of curiosity going in my head to get into your head, and hopefully we'll get to do that. So having said that, just why don't we just warm up and give us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what were the motivations, what choices did you make, and what brought you to where you are today, and actually what took you to China. So let's just get all the way from where you started to China. Go.
Thank you, Anup, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be part of your journey of dairy dialogue, and it's very inspiring when I heard first time from Prashant about my journey. Yeah, I just landed back from China for some small stint and spending some time with my family, and I'm currently sitting in the place called Palanpur. Palanpur is in a northern part of Gujarat in India.
Nice.
So while it has geographically it's very small place, probably many people won't be knowing, but it is housing one of the largest dairy company. Like
Good.
Amul's one of the largest plant is here called Banas, and that has while I never had an opportunity to work with that, but that has a lot of implication why I chose dairy. By the way, why my parent guided me to take a dairy as a stream, because that was a major livelihood in the people in this region, as well as that dairy has brought a lot of wealth in this region and to the people's a lot of people's kids go to school, or the parents get some medicine because they are connected to that dairy. So I've seen how the dairy can support direct betterment of the people who are really at the poor and lower strata. So I really want to say there's a lot of connection with that. So I grew up here, the place Palanpur and nearby places. My mother used to be a teacher. So I started my schooling along with her, and then done the full schooling up to here. And then after 12th, there was an choices has to make whether I need to go to what stream I select. But my mother had a very firm belief that everything will stop, but the food will never stop. So you
Correct.
should. So
Wow.
she was very visionary, and she said that whatever you do, the food will be going to there, and that's the basic necessity. And we
Right.
have a dairy plant just very near to our house. Why don't you select a dairy, because that's available. So I chose my graduation in dairy technology, and that time Anand is like well known for a dairy in India. So
Correct.
Anand is a place where there is a college called SMC Dairy College of Dairy Science. And I I mean, I was like making a choice whether I should apply for it or not, because the form was costing 75 Indian rupees, while the cost of the form for a BSc agriculture was cheaper. So, and I had limited money that time, so we were making whether I should spend 75. The good part of this course was I early on, that was a form. While we say the formative years are like up to the, let's say, third, fourth, fifth in the age of the child, but there is
Sure.
another formative year happens, which is your graduation.
Correct.
You will forget your post graduation, you will forget everything, but your graduation time you will be a
Not
very
forget.
formative, because that's the
Yeah,
time you left your family, you realize what is the real world is. And
that's right.
fortunately, the place where I could able to go to the college, we had very cosmo environment in the college, where we had a people coming out from a different state, and that made that college very unique, that we get exposed to different way of thinking and different culture, how people interact with that, how people behave, how actually they think about their life. And that was the first time my exposure of the people from outside Gujarat. So I really feel that developed my soft skill, and also definitely the technical skill while studying in the college. So, and from there, again, I got really in depth into the dairy and the food science of it. And that the initially 1 year was bumpy ride, because my medium of instruction in schooling was Gujarati. So
Okay.
yeah, so then I shifted to, this was the
Big
first time
switch.
I took an switch to a instruction medium. So that was tough for me,
Of
but
course.
then yeah, the 1 year was enough to cope up. And
and
that
and you're
that's where
also
I
and you're also early on learning how to learn,
exactly.
right?
So, but that time I realized the power of human brain. You don't realize you are learning, but you are learning gradually,
That's right.
subconsciously in your brain. Your brain is picking up that language, and slowly that would be one eureka moment, and you say, yeah, I now can able to understand like more than 50% of the stuff. And so that's a phenomenal power of human brain
That's
once
right.
you get exposed. So the most important thing is getting exposure is most important. Keep exposing your brain to the things which you want to learn or you want to pick up or you want to appreciate. Automatically brain will cultivate. And I don't know, the Hindi, the word is called satsang or sang. It's more currently been pushed toward the spirituality, but satsang is like the to whom you get connected and
Yes,
stay
sir.
with that. So
Correct.
your average personality with the is equal to the five people you are most interacting with. And
Correct. Makes
that's
sense.
what
Makes
happened.
sense.
And I feel that's what I learned there, during my graduation. And then I chose to do my post graduation in the same field.
Okay.
The So I came back to my home and say I want to do a post graduation. And the first question from my parents were, why? We have a dairy plant, and that was the plan, right? That was
That's
why
right.
you are
Go
changing.
work there. Go work there.
Yeah, why there is change in plan? Earlier there was a plan, right? You go there, do a graduation. We have a dairy plant near house. Just go and work. Why you want
Correct.
to go post graduation? So I had another convincing session with them, and I told them probably one thing clicked with them. I said if I could not do post graduation, probably one third of part of my life I have to do a shift, night shift. So I and that clicked with my mother, and she said, yeah, that makes sense, please go and do a post graduation so that you can become professor. So that was another
so,
portion.
so Tushar, this is which year are we in now? We're in
Yeah, we are in
1990.
1997 and 2000 time.
Perfect. Got it.
Yeah. And then I could able to go to Karnal is
Yeah.
the place where there is a national dairy development board in India. And
Yeah.
that's where uh, previous etc based in the place called Karnal.
Yeah.
So I could do my dairy post graduation there, and
Yeah.
then got and then that's where after that the journey started for working in the companies. So the first company I could able to work was National Dairy Development Board, which is I could able to come back to Anand and work with the the PPD wing. That was time they called Product and Process Development. So National Dairy Development Board is, maybe you would be knowing, but in my word, let me explain, is a financial and technical consultancy organization which has a very strong fundamental from a, let's say, government, as well as huge legacy from what Dr. Kurian created, right? So the all while Amul is sustainable, that time I remember in the early 2000, Amul is sustainable from a financial point of view, but many cooperative dairy across India are were not that equipped. They were making, I remember, yogurt for the first time. They were like diversifying the portfolio from white milk to other value added milk like a paneer, flavored milk, etc. for the
Correct.
first time. So that was the early time. And
Yeah,
National
because
Dairy Development,
before
yeah,
that, all of that conversion was very local. Right? This was
exactly.
probably the first time it was happening at an industrial scale, the level it happened. That's right. And
So,
we look back and we don't think about it as much, but back then, that was a really big deal.
that was big deal. So even buying pouch milk was okay from the big cities, because accessibility of milk was question, and there were always question on the quality of the local dudwala used to come. But that at the if you go to villages and at least the mid-sized town, okay, getting buying a pouch milk was like sort of, oh no, this is not good for health, right? So that always a question. So that was the time we are talking about. Yogurt was like even the next step of the thing. So but that NDDB had a vision for supporting this small dairy cooperatives financially as well as technically. So the technical part was sitting with the department I was working. And then from there I took another assignment with a company called Britannia New Zealand Food. So Britannia New Zealand Food was a joint venture between the Vadia Group, the Britannia,
Okay.
and the Fonterra of New Zealand, and that's how the name got it.
Okay.
And that was fascinating, because still now, while working with Amul and the NDDB, I always think you need a factory to produce.
Correct.
But once I went into Britannia, New Zealand, it was only the brand, the factory, everything was outsourced.
Correct.
So they were tapping the capability of the Dynamics Dairy and then some of the dairy companies, which they already have an capex investment, and everything was outsourced. The whole production was outsourced.
So
They
which year is this, Tushar?
This is, we are talking 2007.
Fantastic. Um,
So
as you're saying this, what's going through my head is, like the big transition in my head. We're talking about how we learn things, right? The big transition in my head. There's a connection I made maybe much later than 2007, early 2010s, is that food. You can think of food. I know it's nobody would like this, but you can think of food as it's a platform. How do I assemble different components? And then I create so the platform actually enables you to assemble these components, package it. So there's a disassembly and there's an assembly going on, and you're
exactly.
assembling it to a preference, consumer preference or consumer demand. Anyway, keep going. So that's fascinating. Good. So you
Yeah.
first
So
time getting exposed to a platform. Oh, lovely.
and that gave me a lot of exposure on value added products. So that's where
Yes.
we have localized a lot of formula from Fonterra, New Zealand. And
Okay.
as far as innovation in the cheese is concerned, I still admire Britannia brought a lot of innovation in cheese and pushed the our dairy in especially the cheese industry in India to a lot of variants, slices or the flavored and etc.
Right.
But
And it's also a big risk for a business like that to do it in the time frame they did it, because the probability of failure, I would say, in a market like India for introducing non-traditional contemporary products, the probability of failure is so high,
agree.
uh, right? And you are getting an experience on how risk taking happens or how to make things work. Oh, this is so much fun.
So from there, then 2010, I chose a company called Coca-Cola then,
Yeah,
because
we don't know about Coca-Cola.
a small, and the Coca-Cola that time wanted to launch something in dairy, and with my experience in dairy, we launched a brand called Maza Milky Delight. So which was an extension of Maza.
Okay.
While it was the first attempt in India and we couldn't do well, that product got discontinued. However, I really get exposed on this. The first one, Amul part, was about owning everything or at least part of the system and then manufacturing. Britannia was very different, where they don't own any capex. It's about all tapping and outside. And then Coca-Cola was the third kind of there, where there are capex, but it was used for something else. It was used for juice. Now
Right.
we are stretching that asset and then pushing it to produce something else, which is like
Absolutely.
sweating that asset more. And this was the third model, where our bottling partner were heading that asset and we are stretching that to produce something which is not commonly installed for producing that. Yeah. And then Coke is a phenomenal employer. So
Correct.
while working with Coke, I got an opportunity to in an evening class, I could finish my MBA with the MDI Gurgaon. So the first time I appreciated the synchronous learning and the working together. And I feel that's the right approach, because whatever I could able to learn in MBA, at least a little bit of, I should come back to my office and apply next day.
There's a very personal element of it. And the personal element is, since you are paying for the course, not money, with the time you are taking away from your family, you take that thing more seriously, right?
Yes.
Because previously, what's the cost of it? Here, the cost is you didn't spend time that evening with your kids or your wife or whoever, and you were in class. So I think the expense, that personal expense, makes you extract way more value out of that pursuit, I think, than otherwise.
You are very much, still my wife complains that, when, like for my second child, I could able to spend some more time, but the first child, she sit back and say, hey, like I have a son, the elder one, and say she sometime get angry and complain back to my elder one and say, your father didn't spend that much time which he is spending with younger one today because he was studying. So yeah, it's a fair, and you are right. It's a trade-off. But when the opportunity cost of the trade-off is high, you
Yes,
focus and you extract
correct.
the more value.
Yeah.
So that I didn't had luxury of time during that working and the MBA and the family. I had a much small child at home, so I was using inch of time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and
Yes.
and those were the time where I enjoyed the most, but same time I can
Yeah.
understand my family made a sacrifice, and thank you very much to them. They allowed me to do that. Today also I say to everyone that whatever investment you do in education will get paid by 20x 30x. You won't
Absolutely.
realize
Absolutely.
one of the best investment you can do it in your life, even
And
much
it's an
more than
investment,
stock or a gold.
and it's an investment in yourself,
Yes.
right? I mean,
So
investment in yourself, shouldn't think about it. That's right. Agree.
so I like my MBA would have played multifold. So today when I reflect back, but that time was pinching. That was a high cost.
Of course. That's why you remember it. If it did not pinch, you would not remember it.
Agree. And then 2016, I got an opportunity to, let's say, our dairy center for excellence in Coca-Cola is in Shanghai.
Okay.
So, and then one fine
Okay.
day, I've gotten a phone call that say, my earlier boss says say that we have an opportunity. Would you like to come to China? Now, like for a Gujarati, Europe, US, Australia, a no-brainer, right? You always say yes. But China, you have to think, right? So,
That's right.
but for the my earlier, I had made couple of visits to Shanghai because of my work in Coke. I was
Sure.
comfortable, but the family was not.
Okay.
So yeah, I could able to convince my family, and this was the first international assignment we chose. And I proudly say that that's one of the best decisions I made in my life to go and work in China. Uh, Once I worked and I stayed, I just came back after before just 15 days. I reflect back. So I think I learned a lot in my life whilst
So,
investing 5 years. So
so Tushar, why do you think Coke decided to have their center of excellence for dairy in China? And
mm,
that's a big investment. I mean, investment in the sense is it's the investment is big or small doesn't matter. Um, it's a matter of strategy, right? I mean, it's a big deal to have your. So why do you think that's the case? I mean, I have some guesses, but why do you think that's the case?
yeah, so as far as you can see, business for Coke in dairy is quite spreaded. So we have it in
Okay.
business in North America. We do have it in Latam, few acquired company, as well as some brands in Australia, China,
Okay.
India. The organic business. So if you divide our business in two part, one is which is acquired business, which we procured from outside and then grown,
Yeah.
uh, and then which was started from zero. So the
Okay.
organic business reside in Asia Pacific.
Got it.
So we have started all the organic, like starting from like an entrepreneur launch of the dairy products. It happened in Asia Pacific. So we have a brand called NutriBoost in ASEAN countries. We have a
Okay.
brand called Barista Brothers in Australia. Then there
Okay.
is a brand called Godinayo. Godinayo is a Chinese word. They called Super Pulpy Milky is in China. So these are all
Okay.
brand which are homegrown. So that's the reason a lot of
Makes sense.
talent as well as capability has got invested in. So we ride on that,
That
and
makes sense.
probably second is you can see the one of the growing markets is in Asia Pacific.
Of
China
course.
is going to grow in dairy. Japan is going to grow in dairy. Like half of
Correct.
the dairy growth going to come from India and China, Pakistan. So it
Correct.
makes sense
But
to have it on a like Asia and Africa would be the big engine for dairy in
yeah.
next decade to come.
I mean, my guess would have been exactly what you're saying. I didn't think about the fact that, for Coke, the businesses that were grown from scratch happened in Asia. My guess was the second one, which is the conventional guess, is that Southeast Asia is the way we think about it, ex China, Southeast Asia is 40% of the world's population. So you have 40% of the world's population in such a tight geography. So why would you not have a center of excellence in that, somewhere in that region? and you add China to it. So in this 40%, we include India. And when you add China to it, that number is about 50% population, which is basically a demand base. So that makes sense. Cool. Nice, nice, nice.
Yeah, so we have like tea and dairy, both center of
Okay.
excellence reside in China.
Okay. Excellent.
And specifically, it's Asia Pacific R&D. Yeah, you can say.
Got it. Got it. So you go to China. You're in China now, 2016, and so walk us through. I mean, of course, you learning to live in China is very different, I would argue, than learning to live in, let's say, Paris, or or as you were saying, Australia or the US. Now, so there's a learning to live is one of the one, but what you're also doing in addition to learning to live is you're learning how the China market actually works, because you have to, as a person in Coke, you have to deliver certain business objectives. So help us understand, how do you do that, or how did you do it? What was some of the initial challenges and learnings?
Yeah, so China is, uh, I would say, difficult to get adjusted. So
Yes,
first, when you go
yes,
to any country, generally first 6 months are tough, right?
yes.
Uh, and China is no different than that.
Got
But
it.
the good part about China is once you stay for more than like 6 to 12 months, you start loving it.
I can
Especially as
see
an
that.
Indian.
I can
Uh,
see that.
while 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 we always believe, and I personally believe after get exposed to China that in India or some part of the world we don't know China that enough. We
Correct.
don't know a lot of aspect of China. For an example, a lot of ahas when we say we always felt that China is a very different culture than India, but when I entered and understand, we are very similar than them.
Yes,
We
yes,
is as simple as the calendar. Like
yes.
Indian, the traditionally we follow the moon calendar. China follow moon calendars.
Correct.
While we never thought about it that how closely culturally we are connected. All the
Yeah,
all the festivals and everything happens with the moon calendars, which the Western world doesn't like. They have a different calendar, while
sure.
these two countries are very closely connected culturally.
That's
Uh, Same in again the appetite for a Chinese, uh, maybe let's say the culture to accept the outside in. For example, the Buddhism and everything travel back, and same I see in the people also. They really appreciate and somebody coming from outside, so they're very humble. So I could able to get adjusted faster than I anticipated initially after 6 to 12 months of bumpy ride of language and all. But Shanghai is again very different than other part of the China, but I would say I know only 50 to 100 words in Chinese, but I can survive. And I have invested good 5 years, and I really we my family and we all love Shanghai. Even till today, we miss that.
so 100 words more than I do. I know zero. Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, wonderful. So what I'm really curious to ask you is, so you go to China, you probably had some ideas of how China is, meaning the dairy market and consumers are, and then you learn some things that confirm what you were thinking, and you learn something that completely change what you were thinking. So give us an example of the second one before you give us an example of the first one. What is it something you thought is exactly how it would work and was not the same? Because
Yeah,
you need a level
generally,
of humility to understand that as well. Yes.
exactly. So if you see, you never when you are in other. I was in India, so I was always appreciating the white milk is a main consumption driver. Second is the value added products cannot be more powerful than white milk, right? In a
Correct.
portfolio.
Yeah.
Uh, Second is you always felt like plant based is boomed at this point of time, but we generally believed I believe that okay, there cannot be a consumer which have not tasted in dairy, right? Generally, dairy is everyone knows and everyone have at least in their lifetime exposure to dairy. But when I entered China and I get exposed to the consumer and the plant-based beverage culture in China, traditional culture, they started with soy very strongly
Correct.
before even
Yeah.
the dairy get introduced. Very opposite of like India and that side of where the dairy get exposed first and then plant-based is still clickling in. The
Yeah.
if you say US and Europe, the dairy was very strong. plant-based is not is getting mainstream soon. So China is very opposite, and this is all the aha for me, where
Yes,
the value-added product and the dairy aisle for beverages as well as dairy aisle for different products in China modern trade was phenomenal
correct.
compared to the white milk space. The
Yeah,
and even white milk space is divided into a two specific half. One is a fresh milk,
yeah,
another is imported UHT milks,
got it.
right? Generally UHT milk is a higher process, so you generally charge premium on it. But
Yeah,
in China it's very opposite. It's a fresh milk which charge premium. It's available at the premium cost versus UHT is very dirt cheap there. And the value added product are a position as well as the placed are very different than our earlier thought about. The packaging is another element which was I was not appreciative before when I entered China, and now today the role of packaging play in the product placement, selling, and then value added dairy products is phenomenal. It's
especially,
amazing.
and
It's way
it's
ahead than other market of markets. Yeah.
is just as much a delivery mechanism as it is a demand generation mechanism. And what you're saying in and something you just said, I also was an aha moment for me in the last few seconds is that in China you are learning how to create a demand from the value added side because the consumer may not know the core commodity, fresh milk.
That's probably the challenging your perception of
Yes,
or
yes,
whatever you had it in your mind. And if somebody tells, it's difficult to change, but when you see it with your eyes, and your rewiring happen much faster.
that's right.
So
Correct,
because then there is your brain doesn't have any defensive mechanism can click on because you are seeing it by your eyes.
correct.
and
That's right.
and yeah, but
That's right.
and China is evolving much faster, probably one of the most innovating market for dairy, the way different products are coming on place. And especially I liked about China is the all the concept or science which I used to learn in my Anand time or the college time, how to convert that into a business is I'm seeing the how the dairy processor are doing it. So for few very simple like ambient yogurt, which is everybody knows it, it's a technological innovation and suddenly become a huge category by itself. A lot of this kind of innovation in the dairy which is happening in China is phenomenal. I don't know whether you heard about the cheese caps and
Yeah,
this ambient yogurts, and which are like a science-based innovation, and suddenly it
correct.
becomes like a demand from
Mainstream,
a consumer, and which
mainstream product.
probably very
Correct.
different from a liquid milk, and nobody used to knew that before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. No, absolutely. And then, so the question that I have there is, so in a market like
Hey
this,
Anup.
where milk was not familiar, right? I mean, that's what we are saying. The market was not familiar with milk, but we are creating a stickiness to a value add product or a finished product based on milk. Do you think that there is stickiness of demand to that category? Or do you think there's a lot of work you still have to do continuously to keep the stickiness of that category?
And you are right. You are right in a way, Anup, of stickiness. And that's where we need to challenge ourselves as a dairy or as a food industry, that the demand for dairy is not for dairy. The demand, core demand, or the bottom of the demand curve is a nutrition demand,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yes.
So let's stick
Yes.
what is in it for nutrition, right?
Yeah.
So if is the dairy fluid is best in terms of nutrition or from a cost point of view as well as from whatever it gives to the human body. So if we are having an option of a dairy consumption just because of some small occasion point of view or a for a very short period point of view, then it's the stickiness doesn't exist, right?
Correct.
But
Yes.
at least from I see, the Chinese consumer were not having the milk for like say 20 years or 30 years before. It was mainly soy milk market, but their movement to the dairy is because of the nutrition need,
Makes sense. Yeah.
right? So
The way we have thought about it is calorific demand, and within calorific demand, then we've broken it down nutritional demand.
Right,
and dairy happens to be one of the many vehicles you can utilize to deliver part or all of that stack. That makes sense.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So dairy is like probably Chinese consumer, at least in their brain and they understand it is the most three things: cost effective, indulging, and one of the best nutrition carrier. So
Indulging. Wow. I would have not thought about indulging. So give us a little example of what does indulging mean?
dairy is indulging. Like anything, if you
We
oh
don't
that
think about it because we grew up on dairy, right? So for us, it's like,
yeah.
well,
So think about the dairy in a milk tea, right? Is an indulgence product.
yeah,
So if you add dairy into a tea, it becomes indulging.
got
A
it.
lot of creaminess or anything which is added into a coffee or a flavored milk, it's all indulgence, right? So ice cream is a huge indulgence product. So the dairy is a have a huge element of indulgence into that. Yeah, so there are people who don't like the liquid milk and the smell of liquid milk, and that's fair. However, majority people find dairy and dairy products are indulgence.
That's a good new learning for us. For me, at least, in the sense is, I do agree with what you're saying. I agree with all of it. What I'm going to break it down into is, um, as people in the business, I think, I mean, my view is that we shouldn't care as much whether people drink fluid or eat dairy as long as dairy is consumed. The form is not as important as the what it does for the consumer, right? I think that's one part. The second part, what you're also saying is that I think the connection I'm also making is, so you see, we grew up in a dairy-based diet, both in India and in the West. Right here, the primary source of protein is cheese and yogurt.
Agreed.
India, it was fresh milk. So we have a familiarity with dairy in our lives from a very young age. So we may not attribute necessarily indulgence as an add-on feature. We think of dairy; it's such a common part of our life. But in new markets, when we introduce dairy-based products, I think indulgence is a very, very powerful and a very supportive consideration. So I think that's one big thing that you're also saying, which is very cool. What you're also saying, what I'm also learning is that, you see, for how old the society is, old meaning age, Chinese society has been around for thousands of years. Um,
More than 5,000 years of history.
yeah,
Yes.
correct. What you're also saying is it is also a very accepting and experimentative society from a consumer standpoint, right? I mean, you are introducing these new products, they are getting accepted and consumed and supporting an entire business and supply chain in that. I mean, that is like the thing that you and I were chatting when Britannia did that experiment in India, it was very high risk. I mean, it's a way higher risk in China as well, but the Chinese consumer has supported this innovation as well, right?
Agreed. Agreed. That's and now the whole dairy pricing across you are in procurement. The China demand increases has a huge impact on the dairy prices, right?
Absolutely.
So
Correct.
the whole demand curve for the dairy is driven by one market called China. So so no brainer. And I don't think the dairy would be just a some portion of or sticking point issue. Now it becomes a part of the mainstream for many consumer.
Got
And
it.
and the one unique piece about China is the coexistence of dairy and plant. We always talk the
That's right.
plant versus dairy, but the China is
And
one of the largest plant-based market,
yeah,
but it also one of the fastest growing dairy market. So think about
yes.
this both can coexist. So China
Yeah,
teaches very well.
I think so. I think the coexistence argument, I do completely understand it because you introduced this concept where you said, think about the calorific and nutritional need of a consumer. And moment you think from that lens, it is not a competition, right? It's a coexistence and probably the best delivery of the nutrition um, to that stack. Um, we've taken a lot of your time, so we get into wrap up mode a bit. Is so knowing what you know today, Tushar, what will you advise your younger self 20 years ago? What will you tell yourself if you were advising yourself 20 years ago?
Yeah, probably two things I will tell. One is taking more risk, while I did take, but probably uh, I would repent or I would regret for things I have not done versus things I have done and failed, right? So I would do more risk taking and experimentation versus probably that time I could able to do. That's the one thing. And second is outsource. Uh, I got busy and invested a lot of time in the very small activity. Probably that could have been managed or done by somebody else, which were most experienced, right? So I could have invested that time for something else. So while so these are the two things. Outsource the things to the expert, which you believe can be done by them, and you can use that time for something else which is more creative or more you can do better. And then the first one is taking more risk, and you'll always regret for things you couldn't do it or couldn't try it, versus if you fail you will not regret that. Your
Correct.
human brain again, when you fail you will cope up and you will say, yeah, I took that decision, and you will cope up with that failure. But if you are not done, and then you will not of definitely regret in the future that, yeah, if I would have chose this and I would have experimented this, I have started this business, or I have went for this entrance examination, or I have pushed this boundary, it would have been great. So taking risk and then outsourcing whatever the best you can.
And I have to ask this because Prashant just sent me a message to ask you this question. I was going to ask, but now we have to ask it. Is that um, so? Looking forward, we always keep finding new opportunities to do things within dairy and for dairy to grow. But in your mind, what would you say is still untapped? Is there any untapped opportunity in dairy? So, what is untapped?
Yeah, I believe the accessibility isn't still untapped. And
Got it.
what I mean by the accessibility is making that dairy or a nutrition, like we are saying a bigger lens of nutrition, accessible to more and more people.
Correct.
Now accessibility is number one, come from making it available, but it also it making it available cheap. Like
Yes.
dairy is, we know the powder is one extreme form is powder, which we don't like, right? A lot of people don't like to consume powder, but there's some market like in some market which they have to consume powder, right? And then
Correct.
another extreme form is the fluid milk, whereas we have like a 90% water which we are getting transported and we are
Correct.
investing, and that's not a nutrition, right? Nutrition is the 10% of that fluid,
Correct.
right? So there are two extreme end. What would be that opportunity? I'm really fascinated about the fact that how we can bring that nutrition of dairy or a dairy solid, which is more accessible way. How we can balance between maybe not extreme powder or maybe not transporting 90% of the fluid, which is water. How we can balance this two, and the dairy can reach to more and more consumer with a cost effective way. Because
Perfect.
there are some market where still the dairy production is not there,
Yeah.
or the dairy farm like US or Europe is still is a luxury for those markets. So
Correct. They don't exist. Correct. Good. Tushar, thank you so much for
thank you,
taking a
Anup.
big chunk out of your time and spending with us. Um, we are hoping that this is first of the many dialogues we'll have with you, and learn from you and have other people learn from you as well. So thank you so much for making time, and hopefully we get to do this often.
Thank you, Anup, so much thankful for like inviting me, and really it was pleasure for me. Thank you.
Perfect.